dudes? This is Levi, and I'm from the Shreds YouTube page connecting you to skateboarding. Today we are going to talk about 14 things you didn't know about DC. We are going to cover a bunch of cool stuff. The start of the brand, how the logo became, a bunch of collabs, some key shoes. We're going to cover the team, Robin Big, Love Park, and so much more. The start of the brand. To start with DC shoes, we kind of got to go back and talk about 8-Ball clothing. In 1991, Damon Way, which is Danny Way's brother, met Ken Block, the rally car driver. They met at community college. The community college was in San Marcos, California, and Damon Way was actually really into starting a business and he was interested in marketing, while Ken Block was interested in screen printing. These two come together and start a clothing company called 8-Ball Clothing. After a while of them building the brand 8-Ball Clothing, they find out there's actually another brand trademarked called 8-Ball Clothing, so they have to close their doors and they move on to new ventures. Together they move on to start brands like Blunt Magazine, Type A Snowboards, and Droors Jeans. Droors is actually the most popular, so it expands from Droors Jeans and now moves into Droors Clothing. DC Shoes. In 1993, after they've had some great success with Droors Clothing, they actually moved and wanted to get into more technical style shoes, coming DC Shoes. They actually started DC Shoes with $10,000 that they borrowed from Ken Block's parents. They took a look at the market and realized there's actually a huge lack of technical style skateboard shoes that are on the market. So they went and they actually proved themselves right, because after a year, they did $1.5 million in sales. In order to kind of separate the brands and give each one a unique style, they kept Droors Clothing, but then shortened it to DC Shoes for the shoes. Ken Block was the one who designed the original DC logo.
The DC logo went through a few stages. It started with an oval-shaped DC logo. Then the brand Champion approached them and said, "Your logo is too similar to ours, you have to change it." So DC switched it. Then they designed the DC logo with the 5-point star. Then the brand Converse forced them to lose that logo because Cons has the patent on a 5-point star on footwear. They then switched their logo again to their current logo, the DC logo with the 7-point star.
An interesting fact is the first run of shoes were actually made by Vans, and then they got them made by Etnies, all before moving on to another factory, a private factory, getting their shoes made for themselves. Ken Block then kind of assumes the shoe designer role, working with team riders, getting to hear specifically what they want, so they're getting the best out of the shoes for how they design them. In 1995, they hit $7 million in sales. Moving on from there, they hit $1 billion in sales by 2004. Not a bad return on investment for $10,000 initially. There's a fun fact. In 2002, Jamie Thomas, he quit riding for Circa, and he teamed up with DC to start a shoe brand called Fallen Footwear. DC originally produced and distributed Fallen for the entire world. Eventually, Fallen branched off, went under Black Box, where all of his other brands are. The team. Damon Way, being one of the owners, turned to his brother and said, "Danny, come ride for my brand." With that, he brought on Colin Mckay, and those were the first two team riders, giving them immediate clout because they had huge team riders riding for DC. A lot of people actually think that DC stands for Danny and Colin because they've been there since the beginning. But no, it still was initially Droors Clothing. At that time, they went on to build an amazing skate team with heavy pros. Josh Kalis, Moses Ikkonen, Rob Dyrdek, Mike Carroll, Rick Howard, Scott Johnson, Keith Huffnagel, Carl Shipman, Rudy Johnson, and Caine Gayle. Throughout the years, they've had some super iconic names on the team. Legendary team members. Stevie Williams, Ave, Ryan Smith, Shane O'Neill, Mike Moe, Bobby DeKaiser, Mikey Taylor, Chris Cole, Felipe Gustavo, and even Nigel Houston. The Lynx. They bring on a young shoe designer. His name was Sun Choi, and he designed the iconic The Lynx. The Lynx was an immediate hit. It was so popular that it was constantly on back order, always on demand. Everyone always wanted it. Even to this day, it makes it on so many of the most impactful, most popular skate shoes of all time. To this day, the Lynx is still being reissued, and it has crazy collectors following where to find it, where to buy it. Other notable iconic DC shoes were the Manteca, the DC Court, and the Stevie Williams. Frick, that shoe was so sick, man, with the stitching all went up like, oh. DC Super Tour, 97. Early on in 97, they made a marketing choice to take the iconic, legendary team that they had at the time on a huge super tour. The Super Tour was a massive tour through Europe. And you can find one of the cool things to note is that a lot of the team riders during this tour wore these athletic looking soccer jerseys that had huge DC logos on it. And people will remember that. So at that time, people either loved it or they hated it. But what it did was it branded DC as a really athletic brand at the time. Collabs. A cool thing to note is DC was one of the pioneers of collabs. They're one of the first brands to do it, and they started a trend for moving on. With Supreme being their first collab, they went on to do tons of famous collabs with brands like FTP, Baker, and Dime. They also did collabs with famous artists like Cause and Shepard Fairey, SSUR, John Buscemi, Aaron Rose, Andy Howell, and Phil Frost. The DC video. In 2003, DC decided, we're going to blow everyone's mind and release the DC video. It was an iconic video at the time. It was their first ever full length. The DC video was made by a guy named Greg Hunt. He made other iconic videos like the Vans Propeller video, Transworld Sight Unseen, and Alien Workshop's Minefield. The DC video featured legendary skaters like Ryan Smith, Stevie Williams, Brian Wenning, Josh Kalis, Lindsey Robertson, Ave, Greg Meyers, Colin Mckay, and Danny Way. In this video, Danny Way releases the first ever footage of the mega ramp. He breaks the record for longest jump at 75 feet and highest air at 23.5 feet at the end of the mega ramp. This is foreshadowing to when he gapped over the Great Wall of China. With the Great Wall of China jump, he actually broke both the longest jump and the highest jump record, as well as breaking the speed record on a skateboard. If you know anything about that jump, the day before when he was practicing, he broke one ankle and injured the other and still taped it up and did the stunt the next day. In the DC video, there was a skit premiered called Robin Big, which eventually gained momentum and turned into a TV show called Robin Big. Love Park. The iconic Love Park was designed by an architect named Edmund Bacon. The architecture in the park was an amazing spot for skateboarding. Everything was so unique. When it was first made, it became overrun with junkies and drug dealers and homeless people, and it was a scary place to go. Skaters then found it, came and skateboarded every day, and eventually pushed out a lot of the sketchy people, making it a fun public use park again. The park holds a beautiful, huge statue that you might recognize, the Love statue, made by Robert Indiana. Lots of skaters launched their careers based purely on their skating at Love Park, namely Josh Kalis, Stevie Williams. As skateboarding became popular in the park, the city of Philadelphia made it illegal to skateboard there. So police would visit so many times a day, pushing people out, giving out tickets, and chasing kids out of there, and arresting people. The designer of the park, Edmund Bacon, was actually an advocate for skateboarding. So he came and said, I made this park for public use, for everyone to use. So at age 92, as an act of defiance, he was filmed actually skateboarding through the park.
Oh God! Thank you, thank you, thank you! My whole damn life has been worth it just for this moment.
At this point, DC Shoes comes in and offers the city of Philadelphia $1 million to make the park skatable. Even though skateboarding in the park had an overwhelming amount of support from the public, the mayor of Philadelphia still decided to keep skateboarding illegal, not take the $1 million, and eventually they just bulldozed the park. In 2018, the city redesigned Love Park, put it out there, and now it is a bland, gray lump of messy concrete. A citizen was quoted saying, "It feels like you get a case of the Mondays just walking through the new Love Park. It looks like the city of Philadelphia won the battle. No one hangs out there. So in the end, they made a park that no one uses. What's the use of all the money, all the space? You really blew it." Rob and Big! After the popularity of the Rob and Big skit in the DC video, Rob actually goes to MTV and pitches the idea of a Rob and Big TV show. MTV didn't like it, thought they knew better, and decided we're going to call it Rob Dyrdek's Rules of Success. They quickly realized their idea was dumb, and they went back to the original idea of Rob and Big. The show was so popular, but after 3 seasons, they ended the show abruptly after Rob and Big had a huge falling out. The show was so popular that DC sales, while the show was airing, would go up 50%. Rob Dyrdek still moved forward with MTV, creating TV shows like Ridiculousness, Fantasy Factory, while Big Black went on to have his own clothing brand, and then, eventually, sadly, in 2017, he passed away. The Buyout. In 2003, DC hit $100 million in revenue. In 2004, Quicksilver acquired DC for $87 million. This buyout by Quiksilver helps DC reach $1 billion in sales. DC's Rebrand. DC grew to a crazy side where they were doing tons of different sports. Motocross, snowboarding, all this other stuff. And in 2011, they decided we're going to rebrand our skateboarding division. They launched an ad campaign called Rediscover DC. And it looked like it was giving a nod to the old DC Euro Tour and the way that looked like. At this point, they added a bunch of new skaters, trying to give the brand a new look. We see Steve Berra, Nigel Houston, Chris Cole, Mikey Taylor, all these guys jumping around the brand.
During the Rediscover DC period, their team was stacked and they were throwing a lot of money around. Mikey Taylor had said that at that time he was making $400,000 a year from DC alone.
Lawsuits. When DC was a small company, Dolce & Gabbana, D&G, filed a lawsuit, a cease and desist, against DC because it's based on their logo. Ken and Damon made a deal with Dolce & Gabbana that they were still allowed to use their logo since they were just a small skateboard company. Later on, when DC grew to $1 billion in sales and they were owned by Quiksilver, D&G revisited their cease and desist lawsuit with them. At this point, DC had to take their logo off of all wallets, belts, and sporting goods, which included snowboards. At one point, another lawsuit, DC Comics sued DC, saying you need to change your logo because it's way too similar to ours. It came out throughout this process that DC Comics actually never trademarked their logo, despite using it for decades on their comics. In turn, they had to pay royalties to DC the shoe brand just to keep their logo. This eventually led to DC Comics changing up their logo entirely. DC Snowboards. DC decided they were going to do a full snowboard line. They launched a snowboard division with a team that was so big and so heavy that it rivaled the skateboard team. It included names like Devin Walsh and Laurie Haskari, Ika Backstrom. It's interesting to note that you can't find a snowboard with the DC logo right on there because of the lawsuit from Dolce & Gabbana. Bankruptcy. Whoops. In 2015, the owner of DC, Quiksilver, loses 79% of their market value in just 1 year. This means that they're basically hemorrhaging money and they have to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. DC was still doing well, but obviously they went down with the ship. Bankruptcy made them do a lot of different cuts and refocus the company once again. Some of the cuts that they had to make during this bankruptcy were with team riders like Rob Dyrdek, a huge hit, probably their biggest contract ever. They also had to get rid of Chris Cole, Mikey Taylor, and other skaters. Modern DC. Dude, Damon Way, one of the original creators of the brand, is back at the helm, and he is helping DC refocus and make skateboarding the main thing. One of the cool calls that Damon Way has made is that he's kept on the legendary skaters like Colin Mckay, Danny Way, and Josh Kalis. He's doing that while adding lots of new blood and new style like Wes Kramer, Evan Smith, T-Funk, Will Marshall, John Shanahan, Matter Zapps, Chase Webb, and Thainan Costa. Lately, DC has had a ton of success doing reissues of old iconic shoes like the Lynx, the Stevie Williams, the Reason shoe, and others, where they're having lineups for tons of shoe collectors and people like that. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end. I want to know, what was your favorite era of DC? And who was your all-time favorite pro rider they had ride for the team? I'm Levi. This is Shred's YouTube page, connecting you to skateboarding. Talk soon. Ken Block was out to lunch and totally ridiculous. He put a star in a logo. Actually, collab. The DC video was made by a guy named Greg Hunt. And I actually tried to say Greg Hunt. The video was done by Greg Hunt that was